All right. In the next couple lectures, we're going to wrap up our journey through some non-experimental methods, but we're going to start here with something that's about as close to an experiment as you're going to get, because it does involve manipulation, but it just doesn't have the kind of random assignment component that really allows you to infer causality with more confidence. So remember, we've talked about survey research, observational research, case studies, archival research, all types of quasi-experiments. Remember, those are ones where you're manipulating your independent variable, but there is often a pre-existing group, or you're not able to do random assignment for one reason or another. Single case designs, in a lot of ways, what we're going to talk about now, sort of mix some of these ideas together. They are kind of like case studies, they're kind of like quasi experiments, they're kind of like experiments, and you'll kind of see all those themes pop up as we go through. So I mentioned how they're similar to case studies. Think back to that for a moment. Remember, case studies were these really in-depth sort of descriptions or personal histories about individual patients, often people with brain injuries or particularly extreme cases of mental illness. Or they might even be studies of a particular, let's say, event, like a protest or something like that. But you often will use case studies if you cannot find if there's no chance you're going to get a sample of people. If it's a very rare sort of condition or event that you want to observe, you might use a case study. Single case designs kind of elaborate on this by doing essentially an experiment with a single individual. But because you are only using one person, single case studies are going to have a lot of the same limitation, or sorry, single case experiments are going to have some of the same limitations as case studies, like the absolute baseline level of external validity. You're going to have very low external validity because you're trying to make claims about, the broader world based on the observations of a single person or a single event. And it does help limit the bias that we see in case studies, because remember, case studies are just descriptions um, generally, and at least single case designs are going to bring in a little bit more objectivity by having some sort of measurement, some sort of manipulation. Um, but and they maybe the biggest improvement that single case designs have on case studies is that they do have some measure of internal validity. They have a little bit of that because you are manipulating something and you're able to then infer that those variables are related. Your independent variable seems to have some relationship to your dependent variable. So single case, quote unquote, experimental designs, they introduce that level of control that is essential for internal validity. You're actually manipulating a variable. These are much less common types of designs than true experiments or a lot of the other things that we've talked about, and they have a lot of roots in really early psychological research. So, a researcher that you probably encountered in your intro psych class, Hermann Ebbinghaus. Ebbinghaus was a very early psychologist that was studying mostly in the mid to late 1800s. And his primary area was memory. And if you remember from your discussions of memory in your intro class, Ebbinghaus is the person that popularized and some credit him with completely coming up with the learning curve, that idea of primacy and recency, that you're going to have better memory for things that come at the beginning and the end of a list. And Ebbinghaus studied this by doing lots of experiments on himself, basically, manipulating aspects of lists that he was trying to memorize, using nonsense syllables to basically try to memorize things that he had no prior associations with. And those were single case designs where he was, just using himself as a single participant and trying to see how different aspects of those lists and circumstances changed his memory. Pavlov, another researcher that you're probably at least familiar with in passing, who we credit with really figuring out a lot of the nuts and bolts of classical conditioning. Remember, Pavlov is the person who was pairing food with various stimuli to see if dogs would salivate. Pavlov was not, psychologist really, wasn't really meaning to study conditioning or kind of discover it in a lot of ways. He was actually a physiologist who was trying to study digestion. And so he was trying to get dogs to salivate because he was studying digestion. But in any case, he used a lot of single case designs as well, using individual dogs to see how those responses became paired. So why would we want to use a single case design? Again, a lot of these things are going to overlap with, the reasons you would want a case study, but just trying to institute some level of control in that sort of case study way of doing things. So if you have a particular participant, again, somebody who has a brain injury, someone who has a very extreme form of a mental illness, there might be a reason that you want to manipulate variables when you are, doing different tests for that person. So it could be the uniqueness of the participant. It could be the uniqueness of a particular event or behavior. If something doesn't happen terribly often, or it has, some other features like it's dangerous or it's stressful or something like that, you might not really be able to observe it again and again across lots of participants, and you limit it to a single participant. The one thing that we can really say you can conclude from a single case design with real finality is if there is a theory, for example, that makes a very specific prediction that like something is impossible, like variable X can never lead to variable Y. And by showing that that relationship does exist, in even a single case, you could refute that theory. So single case designs can be a really economical and direct way to say, hey, look, that theory must be in at least some way wrong or need development because this idea that it suggests is impossible happened in this participant. You might also use this in some cases where, there are just a lot of constraints like time, money, things like that. Or if it's very difficult to, train people to do some kind of manipulation, you might first kind of, just try it in a more economical way with a single participant. So in the next video, I'm going to talk about several different types of single case designs and even get into something called the multiple baseline design as well.